All right, we're live. We're gonna wait maybe just another minute, let people get involved, get on, and then we'll start talking about technology and innovation. Let's see. Alex.
Hi.
Welcome.
Sorry, I was having problems.
No worries. We're just getting going, but we haven't started yet. We're letting everybody kind of take a second to log in.
Cool.
Has everyone got a beer? Looks like everybody's got a beer.
I have water.
That's okay. All right. I think we should maybe go and get started.
All right.
So, hello everybody. Welcome to this conversation that we're going to have. My name is Blake Tyers. I'm from Creature Comforts Brewing Company. We are going to discuss kind of technology and innovation in the brewing industry and specifically in the making and production of beer, and kind of just see where that topic leads this wonderful panel of folks and try to just have a great conversation about what's going on. So I will just first start off with having everyone introduce themselves, maybe talk a little bit about who you are, where your brewery is, and I don't know if there's anything you want to throw off the bat about technology innovation in that. Otherwise, we'll just start feeding some questions. If you are watching, feel free to drop us questions. We would love to answer and talk about any of your questions. It'd be great. So let's see. I think... Does everyone have Rob in the top left and then me in the top right in their screen? All right, cool. Let's just go clockwise. So we'll start with Rob and then to John and Alex. So Rob, take it away.
Hi, I'm Rob Hopak. I'm the co-founder and brewmaster at the Lost Druid here in the Atlanta, Georgia area. We're a fairly new brewery. We'll be celebrating our second anniversary in June of this year. Technically, it'll probably be our first anniversary of actually having an event. So, you know, even getting to do these virtual ones is really nice to get to see some new faces. I come from a background in IT, so technology is always kind of at the forefront of everything I'm doing here in the brewery, always trying to find new solutions. And I'll let it move on to Alex at this point.
Yeah, Alex, take it away.
Hi, I'm Alex. I am the production manager of the Special Projects Program at Modern Times in San Diego. So I kind of just oversee the day-to-day movement of beer in and out of barrels and fooders and amphora there and such. And I've been with the company now for about 5 years, just shy of 5 years. I guess to be a little bit cheesy straight out of the gate, a quick shout out to technology for allowing things like this to go on in the midst of all this terribleness. So.
Absolutely. I've definitely been more connected to people than I thought I would be through technology over the last year or so. But this is great. And I don't think necessarily this kind of format should go away either. It's a great way to have people have access to this kind of stuff. Good call. John?
Probably unmute myself. I'm John Leffler. I'm co-founder of Off Color Brewing. We're here in sunny Chicago where it is 48 degrees right now and not particularly pleasant. We opened in 2013, and then we opened our second brewery where I'm at right now in 2016 or 17. I don't know, a couple of years ago. And here at Mousetrap, our taproom location, we do all of our mix firm and sort of more experimental R&D sort of projects out of here.
Very cool. And I'm Blake Tyers. I'm the wood cellar mixed fermentation director at Creature Comforts, based out of Athens, Georgia. And we've been open since 2014 and have been primarily just selling our beer in the state of Georgia. However, we are just now starting to sell our beer in South Carolina for the first time. So that's pretty exciting for us. We have 2 breweries. I kind of work mainly at our Snow Tire, which is our original facility, in kind of a limited release and also in an R&D capacity. And our other large brewery is called Southern Mill, and that is kind of a much larger 36,000 square feet production facility, making lots of beer. So very cool. Let's see. Let's start off with just the beginning. I'm kind of interested with all of you guys. Kind of curious of what your innovative process is like. What's your creative process? So kind of where do you look for inspiration? How, are you starting with ingredients? Are you starting with your tanks, your process in actually in the brew house? What kind of leads you to think about how to improve or innovate, new beer designs and things like that? Let's see. Rob, you want to take it away?
Sure. That process really is open-ended because it varies depending on what I'm actually trying to work on. I would say, truthfully, first and foremost, my innovation begins in the tap room. It comes from talking with our customers. I try to find out really what they're looking for in a beer, and then talking with them specifically about the beers we do have on and what they do like about it, what they don't like about it, what their dreams and hopes would be if they had, their perfect beer in their hand, and kind of go from there. And then, of course, once I get into the brew house, it becomes very data driven for me. I do look at every possible way to either increase my efficiency, creating a better product, and generally just making it a happy environment for those working with me, so that we're not stuck here because of something stupid we did, and it end up being a 20-hour day. So yeah, it's taproom first. It's the people around us, our customers that take me down the road, and then depending on which way I go, that can deviate into so many different things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it takes everyone a certain amount of time. Certainly took me a certain amount of time to realize that at the end of the day, a customer is got to buy this beer, and you're trying to figure out how to bridge that gap of that dream and vision you may have, and trying to sell that beer to someone and tell that story. That's a really good call, and pretty cool to be able to do that in the tap room and just plug in everybody. Alex, what's it like for you?
Yeah, I mean, similarly to Rob, we take customer feedback into heart pretty heavily. We have our league in theory, which is our reserve society. It's about 1,200 people of our, most loyal fans who have a pretty direct line to us through our dedicated team of customer service, who's just serving those 1,200 people. So it's pretty remarkable the amount of feedback that we get from them. And we use some of that just straight how they give it to us. We just put that right into practice. Other ways, I guess, sometimes the need to innovate comes from demand to increase a product that we had made. Sometimes we make these really fun, fanciful festival-sized keg batches or something like that, and then you realize that melting marshmallows for a half barrel of beer is a lot different when you have to scale that up to 15 barrels, and you're like, maybe we made a mistake. But sometimes, that really drives innovation, just the processes and things like that. I mean, and for my own personal, creativity process, that just comes from being out in the world, just tasting things, of course, other foods and drinks and beverages, but also just like being in moods and kind of, wishing that I had a particular beverage and not having it, and just kind of trying to tap into that and really like dig into what it is that I'm craving and see if I can make that, so that the next time I find myself in that place, I have that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely had the similar moment where I'm like, oh, we've got to scale this up a little bit. Now that's going to be interesting. And I really think some of the more moments of creativity come out of, when you're forced a little bit. If it's a wide open blank slate, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to put your finger on what you're trying to create. Whereas if you're forced into a problem and saying like, here's a lot of set knowns, and they aren't variables. And there's this little window of variable that kind of forces some innovation for sure. Many times, particularly in the, I think I can imagine times in the brew house, even if you're just trying to figure out how to get wort to a tank from another tank that isn't supposed to have that pathway, to coming up with a new flavor design and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So John, tell us about your innovative process at the Mousetrap.
So I guess we're kind of odd man out, at least I am over here. It's not that I don't listen to customer feedback, because you definitely do, especially when people do not like something. But in terms of coming up with like more novel ideas, sometimes of course there's always a gestalt process where like an idea just comes to you like out of the blue and it's fully formed, but that I'm not that smart, and that's kind of exceedingly rare. So it's grateful when it does happen. But for us, it's a lot of, sort of in a similar thread of building on what's going on around the brewery, sort of what's going on around the seasonality or what's happening at farmers markets or whatnot. Always try to have like a couple, 2, 3 things on the fire of like new projects or new ingredients trialing, or just something different. And then it's like, okay, like this is coming along. How can we blend it into something else to create a bigger release, sort of building layers of complexity. So we do that. Part of that's necessity. So like we have these relatively large fooders behind us, and I'd love to be able to sell 45 barrels of fruiter beer all in one go in our 250 milliliter bottles, but it's a lot of cases.
Yeah.
So we use those as sort of a base, and then we have a bunch of puncheons and other smaller casks we can blend together to create multiple products out of a single batch of fruiter beer. But that's really been a driving bit with us. So part of it is necessity, and part of it is just, I don't know, we have this lying around, we have that lying around, and reading about this. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always the real world consideration. I think that a lot of people forget about is that, yeah, it's like, okay, I've got this killer idea and it's going to be really interesting. And then you've got to really hard check yourself on how much you think you're going to be able to sell of it, how well you're going to be able to connect people to that journey and that idea and that flavor profile. And then look at your infrastructure and your tank size and your capacity and your ability to either package a certain size or how small you can go or all those sorts of things. How many labels do I need to print out? How can I reach the consumer? It actually, there's a lot of considerations. Absolutely. And then I think a lot of times that's where like got a food that's X big and some barrels that are Y big. So you know what? I'm going to have to create 3 new things, and I've only got 2. So let's get creative and come up with number 3. Certainly have been in those shoes. It's pretty cool. So Rob, you said something that struck me. You were talking about how you use like IT in, or you came from like kind of an IT background, right? And I'm kind of interested in seeing how. Have you tried to pull in any interesting technology in the course of running your brewery and kind of building it out that's kind of unique?
I don't know if I would completely consider it unique. We currently are going down a path right now to start implementing, something as mundane as our glycol system. That seems every brewer I talk to says at some point or another that they always have issues with their glycol system. And what I'm realizing is that I come from a family that is in the construction world, and I'm realizing that there is technology that's used there that is known as PEX. It's supplanted using copper lines and even PVC lines in homes. It's more flexible, and it's used for water distribution, and it utilizes a manifold technology. And right now I'm doing a study on using that manifold technology and what are known as proportional valves. So most people have solenoids that are in their brew house that are simply turning on and turning off to allow flow. The proportional valves actually allow you to finely tune to, say, only open 5% of the valve or 10% of the valve. And implementing that along the manifold line to more evenly distribute the load of the glycol around the entire brew house, and be able to keep the beer very consistently at the same temperature. where now we may have a swing of, say, 2 or 3 degrees Celsius. It really lets me get it down to more of the 0.2 or 0.3 Celsius differentials. And that just can make a huge difference.
That's pretty cool. So what would be your guess on why there's this like gap between existing technology in another industry and more people implementing it in our industry?
I think it kind of goes with that whole mentality of this has worked for so many people before. Why change it?
Right.
We see that all over in the place in a brew house. Even, the actual brew house that I have here is a European system out of Slovenia, and it was designed by a company that for the last 100 years has been making equipment to process cheese. And one of the family members on that ended up becoming a master brewer in Europe and realized that some of the technology they had could be really well utilized in a brewing setup. And it kind of bucks the trend. It's a 2-vessel system that, isn't on a traditional deck or anything like that. It's on wheels. I can move it around, which certainly helped for our build out, because we had the ability to go up, not so much out. And so we were able to put our mill room up on a second level, and still, with our small footprint, be able to move the equipment out of the way to just forklift our grain up to there.
That's pretty cool. Interesting. So let's see. I'm kind of curious. Is there any technology, Alex? Totally doesn't have to be related to what Rob said at all. But is there technology that you maybe have noticed from other industries that play into what you do? Maybe practices from the wine industry, or who knows? Baking probably wouldn't be too far off from what some of the stuff we do. Anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we incorporate when you start talking about baking and such. That immediately brings to mind how we do secondary processing on a lot of our ingredients for our pastry stouts, like vanilla toasting our pecans, or maple syrup toasting our hazelnuts, or whatever. We, I guess at some point we decided, rather than just throwing the maple in and just throwing the pecans in, that you do get a little bit more out of it from combining them and bringing them up to temp, and then getting those reactions out of them and caramelizing those sugars. And it's a very tedious process, and we could definitely use a scale up in our equipment for it. But I feel like it's one of those things that just like kicks it up a notch in terms of quality for the pastry stouts.
So you're like tossing your pecans or whatever in maple syrup before you roast them?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of work, because if you feel like sharing, or if you want to give us a range, like how many pounds per barrel of pecans are you using in a typical stout?
Oh gosh, off the top of my head, I can't say, but as far as a rate, but I can say that it's usually a couple 100 pounds at a time.
Yeah.
So
it's a lot.
Just, like in a 5-tray convection oven. So
yeah,
the process.
That's some serious work. And so actually, that's going to lead me to another thing I want to come back to. John, you're kind of stealing old world behind you. You've got old winemaking casks. Is there some way that you are also kind of taking ideas from other industries or other technology and kind of trying to bring it into what you do? I know also you work a lot with sake, things like that. How does that play around with you?
Our big focus is on fermentation and yeast profiles. So that's where the majority of our sort of brand identity in terms of the mousetrap side of stuff comes from. We're constantly looking at, pouring through like whatever the new yeast catalog is coming out from like Scott Labs, or like larger wine companies, wine yeast companies. I have a lot of friends in work in labs doing wild yeast isolation and such, and we do some of that ourselves as well. So for us, it's really like trying to find new, novel, and interesting yeast stuff. That's really been, and I imagine we'll talk about it in a little bit as well, but GMO yeast, I think, is going to revolutionize this industry. And I'm really excited by it. For years, I've been trying to get local labs to mess around with it with me, because it's outside my wheelhouse of ability. But the ice dam is slowly breaking. I think some really cool stuff is going to come out of it.
Yeah, so Well, let's talk about that for a second. GMO yeasts are definitely interesting, and I think they're could be popping around more and more in our industry. I think very commonly it was probably a couple years ago when we did a small collab with you guys at Modern Times that used some of the yeast that produced. I think it was hop terpenes at the time, and we started that was one of the first forays into it. We haven't done too much yet. John, what about particularly what kind of add-on to the yeast world excites you in the GMO options?
Be able to more consistently reduce flavors. It's fascinating and fun and great to sort of always be on the cutting edge and not quite knowing what yeast is going to be doing. Everyone else here can talk about making wild beers as well. It's like you have some control over it, but there's a lot that you don't. And it's fascinating and wonderful to, feed it different sugar profiles and then see how that affects fermentation. See how pitch rate and comorbid fermentations matter. But it would also be very nice to be this little bit makes this really nice pineapple flavor. Let's just go ahead and put that in a very easy to work with yeast and sort of call it a day so we can focus on some other more complex issues. I think that would make a lot of our lives very much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen yeast now that producing ALDC, excuse me, which is kind of helping out with hop creep, which we were talking about a little before we got on air. And I know that's a problem with a lot of breweries, particularly if they're making hop forward styles. Rob, have you ever heard about the US-05 that's now crossed with the ALDC? It produces its own ALDC effectively.
No, I'm not familiar with that at all.
Yeah, I recently saw that coming out where people are it eliminates hop creep in the way that it doesn't necessarily eliminate the production of the precursor, but it produces its own ALDC so that it takes care of it before it's basically turning into diacetyl. So your beer could still creep. However, you still have the fermentation issue of worrying about fermentation bombs, but you can avoid having diacetyl just by a yeast that cleans itself up even more effectively than it normally does.
Yeah, it's incredible what some of these things can do right now. I mean, it's not just from the flavors, as John was mentioning, what you can do with that and just getting highly creative, but, even down to the point where we are a solar brewery and, we're pretty focused on the environment where we're at. And we have county regulations that, we have to be real concerned with our wastewater going out. We pre-treat all of our wastewater before it heads out of here, even for as small as we are. And the opportunity to let some of these GMO yeast reduce our footprint in our wastewater by, potentially even eliminating so much of the hopping that might take place because we can now get the flavors from the yeast. Lowering the BODs and phosphate levels. It just opens up so many things to the entire industry.
Absolutely. It is pretty interesting. It will be really interesting to see how consumers react to GMO yeast over time. Because I think it kind of can draw immediate connotations from the consumer one way or another. Alex, have you guys done anything since we originally did that with the GMO yeast several years ago?
I will be honest, if we have, I was not privy to it.
That's fair.
I work down the street, for those that don't know, about a half mile from the actual brewery, and we get our work toted down. So I'm not always super on the pulse of what's going on down there, especially as it pertains to IPAs and such. My focus is pastry stouts and mixed firm.
Totally. I get that world for sure. We had an interesting question come up, kind of the balance between favorite new tech in brewing and old school methods that you can't let go or find more effective. I think that can actually play well. Rob, you mentioned some sustainability efforts. Anything you guys want to take with that? Rob, if you want to go ahead and talk about how maybe you're using sustainability, and that might be some new tech, or you can just go wherever that question kind of leads you. Regardless of the topic.
Well, I'll touch on one aspect of that. And, as I mentioned, we have a fairly unique brew house in here that is definitely what I would consider new tech, but it's being pulled from old world, just processes that existed that were outside of beer. But in utilizing our system, you can kind of see that our little pilot system sitting behind me and we're kind of going back old school with some raw ales that we've been producing, but using methods such as decoctions and things like that, so that we are still able to isomerize the hops to come back in, and utilizing more modern day, stainless driven type equipment to pull that off.
Yeah, that's really interesting. John, we'll come back to you. How are you balancing any new technology you're bringing into your brew house, or are you leaning old school?
So sort of laboratory and sensory stuff, I think, is a really interesting connection between those two worlds, because now it's relatively easy to run things through a gas chromatograph, and you can know what precursors are there, you can know what smells are there, you can quantify them, and a lot of that is super useful and helpful, and it's great technology, but also it can, I think, hinder some people. So at the end of the day, it's about creating an emotional
Oh, John broke up a little bit.
Was your shit. I think the old school approach of like, what does beer actually smell like to another human being, still matters a lot more. It's really nice to be able to run something through a GC and say, there's not diacetyl in this beer, you are effing wrong. That's really nice, but that doesn't help with the, like, this smells to me like roses and creates this perception, and I want to express that idea to another human being. How do I go about doing so? That's where I think the artistry of what we all are trying to do really comes in.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The old school is, does this make you feel good when you drink it? Does it make you want to have conversation? Does it make you want to take another sip? And that ultimately is, I think, what we all search for. And if we ever are using technology, it's how can we continue to create that process either as sustainably, effectively, or continually as possible. I 100% agree. Alex, are you guys kind of picking up any new stuff or old school? I imagine, being in the world of mixed fermentation and pastry stouts, that you're firmly square in the middle of both of those things, where a lot of the, and not to be presumptuous, but I would guess that a lot of the mixed fermentation stuff would be feeling a little more old school, whereas the pastry stout, you're feeling a little more, how do we do new things that haven't been done before? How does that balance work for you?
I'll be honest, it's a little challenging because I prefer working with the mixed culture side personally. I learned how to make that beer at Jester King, and it was all very, sensory, almost like art magic based approach to making beer. When I was taught about yeast harvesting and repitching, what Garrett told me was literally, if it looks good and it smells good, use it. Like, that's how I was taught. So that kind of mentality is still kind of like the core of how I make beer, just trying to fit in at a production brewery where it is, like, when the lab asks me what yeast we used in a mixed culture beer, I can't just say like, oh, I just pulled off a few gallons off that firm, it smelled really good. Like, they want to do a cell count, they want to know what's in it, they want to know viability. And so it's a weird kind of juxtaposition of those things there, definitely.
For sure. It creates a healthy tension. I run through the same thing sometimes where, I look at it basically as not necessarily my job, but I have the opportunity to create these wonderful questions for our lab guys to answer. And so, when they come up and they are asking about, the person who's our quality director, his background is in genetics. And when he first started, was like, so tell me what's in the mixed culture. And I was like, our house culture, we don't really know what's in it. I put it together, and I told him about all the sources and how we put it together over a period of time. And he's like, so you don't know what's in there? I was like, no. And he's like, well, what happens if it changes? It's like, it probably does changes all the time. We don't really know. And so that set him off on this wonderful journey. And it was a pretty cool way we were able to use technology, was that he was able to do genetic analysis on our house culture, to where we basically got, it may still be changing. And of course it is, it has to be, it's living, breathing organisms all working in symbiosis, and over time it is going to change. But when we did that project, that gave us a very nice, checkpoint in the road where, kind of like in an old school video game or something, if you die, you go back to that moment. It's like, all right, well, if we ever get to a point where our beer is not tasting the way we want it to, we certainly have a point in time where we know what was in there, we banked it, and we could even decide to start doing isolated trials, if we wanted to, where we could say, this yeast is in here, this bacteria is in here. Let's figure out what each one of those things do kind of on their own, and which one of these we might figure out have a certain gene to produce, say, acetic acid or other problems that we don't necessarily like, we can kind of select that away. We haven't done that yet, and we really haven't had a need to yet, but we'll see, because I think everyone is kind of facing less and less pull through a mixed fermentation beer, so it might slow all of our cultures down a little bit. But it's a lot of fun. Yes, there is a constant struggle, but it's not really struggle. It's a harmonious effort, hopefully. And it's pretty fun. Our lab guys, they like the challenge. Cool. So Rob, you touched on it a little bit, sustainability, and I think it's kind of interesting to talk about a little bit more. I wanted to see so you said, is that right? You're a solar powered brewery?
Yeah. So we were the first solar powered brewery in DeKalb County, and I believe we were actually the second in the state to actually have it fully implemented. I believe New Realm was the first one. Then we deployed ours, and then right behind us was Terrapin. I believe they started theirs a little sooner, trying to get things off the ground, but because of the scale of theirs, I think we kind of beat them to the punch on that. But yeah, we do have a large solar array on our roof. It's providing roughly, I'd say, 40% of our power for the entire brewery. Certainly love to expand it, but that's a whole nother issue, because unlike many states where the utilities buy back power, the commercial entities here in Georgia do not buy back power. So we have to limit how much we are actually generating, so it's not just all going back into the grid at our cost back to the provider.
Yeah, you got to pay to make their product.
Yeah, exactly. So it's hopefully that'll change, and we can try pushing all the way to get as close as we can to that 100% mark.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, we just started using some solar power as well. Installed solar panels. It's the same kind of deal. You kind of ease your way into it, figure out how much it actually generates, how much you need, and then it helps you. Basically, you have to dial in over time, like you're making beer, to figure out how much solar power to actually create.
Oh yeah, and I'm expecting it to really kind of take a few years to really get a full grasp of it, because just the seasonality differences, the shift in the sun, how production changes depending on what time of the year it is. All those things come into play to really try to plot those graphs and figure out how you can plan to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty crazy. Alex, are you guys being able to work with any sustainability efforts or using technology in that matter, or it's totally fine? That might be a little bit out of your wheelhouse of what your purview is there.
Yeah, I would say if we are, I'm not aware of it.
That's totally fine.
We have been able to get into the city's composting program, at least, which is really great considering the vast amounts of just coconut and vanilla coffee grounds for our cold brew program, as well as beer, those kinds of things. So that felt pretty significant. Go straight to the city's composting program, and they actually make mulch of it and give it back out to the city residents. So that's nice.
Yeah, that's super cool. I've got a little garden in my backyard, and I would love to have some of your compost.
Rich.
John, are you guys, being in a metropolitan area, sometimes it gets a little tough to kind of figure out what you got to do. Are you forced into any sustainability? Are you guys able to do anything at the Mousetrap?
We don't dump our grain in the river, so that's pretty good. We certainly have some challenges, like having a farmer come and pick up your grain is not a plausible scenario.
Oh, John, do we have you?
I think I lost everyone.
There you are.
Sorry, the Wi-Fi is not very sustainable here either. It's difficult for us to get grain to farmers and stuff like that. So unfortunately, a lot of our stuff does go to landfill. It'd be great if more more clout and pushing forward things like recycling, but they are focused on other issues right now, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, people will have to come around it sooner or later. It's kind of a force to be that way. So innovation, I think an interesting topic in innovation. We've kind of hinted around a little bit, and I'm interested in see what your guys' approach is. Thinking about how you connect to your consumer. Let's say you have a really interesting idea. What are some ways that you try to tell that story, or you try to integrate? Maybe not even try to tell the story about what you're doing, but maybe it's Alex, like we were mentioning, where you've got a large group of people that are really passionate about what you do, and they have a lot of ideas about what you should be doing. So how do you kind of filter that? We'll start with you, and I'm kind of interested in how everybody integrates that kind of front to back with their consumer. Like, how do you connect with them and take that idea and say, okay, let's put this into practice? Or your idea is insane, but I'll try something else out. Where are you on that spectrum, and what are some cool things that you feel like you've been able to do with that?
Me?
Yes, Alex, sorry.
That's okay. I figured, but so yeah, like I said, we have that big club, but I don't really have direct contact with them because there is a whole team whose job is to interact with them and to just really make it an experience to be part of the club, as well as like access to great beer. So they do things like go camping with them, and not in the last year or so, but whale watching trips, camping trips, parties, themed things like that, bottle shares. They're all like, it's actually become a pretty tight knit social group. So and we have pretty good access to them just through Stephen, Michael, Leanne, and Alana, who are our league coordinators. So yeah, I mean, for us, we stay busy just in the cellar making the beer, and so it's the best we can do to have regular meetings with that team to get the feedback, to hear what the people are saying, and to just trust that they know what they're talking about when it comes to those things, and to try to not let ego and pride get in the way. When they give feedback or tell us to make something that we might not be super amped about, or give bad feedback about something that we were particularly passionate about, and just trust them, trust that they know what they're doing. They're professionals and they've been doing it for years. Some ways that we've been able to make that work, though, is again, like in the before times, as we say, we've had some of our like top spenders in the club, which it feels kind of bad to pit them against each other that way, but had some of the top spenders come in and actually taste barrels with us and kind of propose blends. And we came up with one that was not something we would have made otherwise, and we named it after one of our members, and it was a pretty wild thing that happened, and that became one of our regular offerings, and it's one of our more hyped beers every year. I think like that really personal connection, like having that direct access, like I said, does make it an experience more than just an ability to buy beer from us.
Yeah, that's pretty wild, and that's really cool. Though, I mean, I'll be honest, it's very difficult to do what you're saying. That, I mean, in that simple sentence of put your ego aside and assume you, who have spent so many hours and countless times and years learning this craft, to hear someone just say, "Hey, I give you money. You should definitely create this product." And there's some ways where that can definitely be helpful. And there's some ways I know where that can be frustrating. So good on you guys. And I know you're doing a great job of it, because you have a fantastic reputation for the beers you're making. And it's just pretty cool to see how well you do. I mean, that's a sizable club at what you were saying, 1,500 members or something around there.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of folks who are passionate about what's going on.
Yeah, it goes both ways too. Like when we do have some of the wackier ideas, we use them definitely as like a field test, and so we rely on that feedback to know whether we're headed in the right direction with something. So in addition to taking their ideas, we also just like bounce our really weird shit off of them and see how it's going to go, and they let us do that.
That's cool. And then you guys have multiple locations, so are you able to get feedback from all your tasting rooms, or is it mainly focused on the club feedback, or how are you guys managing that?
Yeah, so we have pickups for the club now at all of our locations. So there are people all over, and even we allow proxy pickups as well. So even we have people all over the nation. I don't know exactly what the distribution is, so I could be wrong about that. But so it definitely did change the logistics of getting these beers out for the sales on time, having to make sure that they're in 8 different locations. But that was pretty much it. We just have to package them a little bit earlier to give our logistics team time to get them out, and then it's the same as picking them up in San Diego. Before the pandemic started, we were having a tasting before each pickup so that the members could come in and taste the beers that they were picking up and not have to open their own bottles, which also added some value to the membership, of course. And it was also another good experience to touch base and get to know people and bring some familiarity to it, make it more of a club feeling.
Yeah, it's very cool. John, I personally have admired how you guys have been able to connect to folks. I think it's pretty cool how you guys have made a history over like making not normal beers that most breweries can sell and selling them. So I'm kind of curious of like what you guys do or what your general approach is in being able to, take your beers and connect to the consumer and get them interested.
It's always a challenge, especially in this last year. Just talked very, very openly and very directly to thousands of people. Hopefully, not cutting out too much. Seems everything. Like one thing that's worked really well for us has always been sort of that direct interaction with customers. So for us, like we have a location that was really big for us with our ability just to directly communicate what we're doing and have people have the ability, like Alex said, to have a sampling event so that people can try things in a way without having to buy $20 or $50 or something. But again, like I said before, like my other thing is trying to create an emotional experience with somebody else. So I spent a lot of time just like writing about our beers this year. So we've been doing guided tastings. We don't do anything in person per se, but people have been coming here to our patio and they'll get a 5 or 10 page sort of series of essays about why we make the beer, how we make the beer, and what we're trying to do with the beers that we're making. And that's been really, really nice for us because we can't have that direct interaction, and I'm not thrilled about doing all these Zoom calls this year. So that's been really good for us is just trying to take old mediums of communication and just utilize those as best we can. Also, a social media guy, periodically does little animated videos, which are super fun, like stop motion animation. They're not very helpful for explaining what the beers are, but they are fun.
Yeah, it's just pretty cool for you guys to be able to kind of use like your Beer 4 series that I've seen you guys make, where it's Beer 4X and different activities, and then you can tell that the style or the beer that's underneath that is quite innovative or esoteric, and not necessarily something that's been done before, but having a name like that in the communication channel to the consumer really boils it down to an easy, digestible, emotional, visceral level of where this fits into your life. And you don't need to know about the style. You don't need to know about our process or ingredients. You just need to know this is where it goes. And this is how you plug it in. I think that's
trying to make it friendly and accessible for folks.
Yeah, it's super smart of you guys.
Then you can couch the more difficult concepts by just having a very easy name, like we have Beer for Golf. I have no intention of ever going golfing, but we make a really nice with beer underneath it. So.
There you go.
Yeah, I've been shocked. For us, we make a beer called Tastes Like Flowers, and I cannot believe how popular it is. It's a mixed fermentation beer, and it is one of our most popular mixed fermentation beers. And I'm convinced the only reason is because it's like people are like, yep, tastes like flowers, cool, because we put fresh flowers in the beer that we picked that day. And it just blows me away. And it's like, all right, well, we need to get better about making all of our names tell the story, and making it easy, particularly in beers that are a little more out there. I think we can get out there with the names on our IPAs. We got beers that are already out there. We need to rein them in. Rob, you've got the benefit also of having a small and direct connection to consumers. How are you able to effectively tell that story and take your innovations on the beer making side to the people? And is it just as a matter of getting face to face with them and talking to them, or what else are you guys doing?
Well, it certainly starts with the face to face. Outside of that, I think, probably the most critical piece is to never be afraid to dump something down the drain. When we are trying to do the innovations and we're trying to stretch the boundaries a little bit, it's not always going to work out. And it's never an immediate dump down the drain kind of scenario. It's always, okay, what can we do to this to see if it would make it better? And then work our way backwards if we find a positive on that, and say, okay, so where do we go wrong to begin with, and how do we prevent that again? And I know that didn't completely get into what you were asking me on that. One of the other huge aspects we have with our consumers is that we do try to leverage, I guess I would say, cultural differences that we have from people from different countries, etc., and the flavors that they can present. I love talking with people that I can tell are either from another country or they're traveling through from different parts of our country, and kind of discussing with them what are their unique flavor profiles that they have, and learn from that. Because I think when you start carrying over some of these flavor profiles that you never, ever imagined because you're just never exposed to it, that starts to open up a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great segue. I'm kind of curious. Is there particular, I love looking at all sorts of flavor for inspiration on how to put stuff together. And I'm kind of putting everybody on the spot. Actually, all of us putting everybody on the spot, but I'm going to, we'll kind of navigate through it. But is there anything recently or, something you've had, or a general cuisine or food or cocktail or one category of those things that you kind of get most inspired by? And if you want a second to think, like, for example, there's kind of 2 or 3 main worlds that I think I've been inspired by, 2 probably, or 3 in particular. So there's the wine world, where I'm definitely interested in kind of how wine teaches lessons to us about flavor. So, for example, I learned through wine how alcohol and acid work together, whereas a lot of our beers being kind of 4%, 5% ABV, particularly like we make a kettle sour Berliner Weiss that's 4.5%. The way that acid presents is going to be much, much different than, say, like a white wine does. And even though there's similar acid levels when you check the pH or the titration, it's pretty interesting to see how that alcohol adds a certain level of sweetness that balances both those things out. So that's personally made me kind of lean on adding a little more alcohol to our mixed fermentation beers, particularly those with fruit. I think, for dry is not really a variable in mixed fermentation beers. So adding more alcohol adds perception of sweetness. And that's really been really good for like our strawberry beer this year. We upped the ABV a little bit by blending a little bit more heavy in the ABV, and it makes it seem fruitier. And then I also take stuff from like pastry world, where we had a donut one time. I shared this beer with John many moons ago. But I had this donut that I was like, this is a really interesting flavor profile. It was a donut with a passion fruit glaze with cocoa nib specks in it. And I was like, you know what? We should do a beer with cocoa nibs and passion fruit. And a long time ago, we did a beer called Blue Star after Blue Star Donuts, just this donut I had in Portland, Oregon. So kind of curious. Like, I'll just go around to everybody. But Rob, is there stuff, either flavors or compositions from other industries that kind of, make its way into your design?
Absolutely. I kind of look at it that we have, a bit of a culinary influence in a lot of things that we do. And being the Lost Druid, we are kind of about nature. So we do a lot with herbs, with flowers, like you mentioned, with vegetables, and of course with fruit, like any brewer really works with. And kind of exploring those opportunities even recently led to a brand new beer that we have on right now, which is called Spellbinding, which I discovered that there is a juice that was very popular in Jamaica and in East Africa that was comprised of pineapple and ginger. And that really kind of piqued my attention because I thought, okay, the sweetness from that pineapple is probably really going to complement that sharpness of the ginger. So we started playing around with that a little bit just in one of our base sours. We use the Brazilian style sour here as our base. And what I found is that they did complement one another, and I could see why it would be a very popular juice to drink. But from a beer perspective, I thought that it kind of took you too much on a roller coaster of both extremes. And so we ended up looking at that and actually discovering that actually adding in pear was able to reduce the sweetness of the pineapple and then at the same time take away from some of that sharpness of the ginger. And so we went down that route. Now we have that beer on, and it's proving to be an incredibly popular beer.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, you just had to build a bridge for those two extremes.
Yep.
Pretty cool. Alex, where are you searching for inspiration? Or anything in that world?
Definitely for the mixed culture side, cocktails come into play a lot, which is kind of silly because I'm not even a huge cocktail drinker, but I like to flip through like the books and such to just look for pairing sort of ideas. And I've tasted enough cocktails that I can figure as far as the spirit base or what liqueurs are in it. So for that, a lot, but also with the pastry stouts, of course, just desserts out in the world. And I do have a crazy sweet tooth, which is kind of funny that I don't really love pastry stouts. I don't like to drink the desserts as much. I like to chew on them. But so I do get a lot of inspiration for those things just from just dessert menus. We're actually doing a whole series that we're starting pretty soon of just ice cream inspired pastry stouts. So it's fair to say.
So it's pretty interesting. You guys, maybe not everybody knows, but you guys, I think you're known for somewhat of having like vegan beers. So how are you focused necessarily in the ice cream aspect of that, or just the flavors that go in there?
Yeah, just the flavors that go in there. So of course we're not using lactose. We're not using dairy of any sort. We do get a lot of the like sort of ice cream feel for it from just excessive amounts of coconut and vanilla. But yeah, so and we also don't ever use honey, or we won't ever put caramel in our beers, or those kinds of, just it does make it a little bit more interesting when we're collaborating with breweries that do use like whole ingredients. And we want to talk about doing one of their beers or something, and they say, oh yeah, and then we just throw like 50 pounds of caramel in. We're like, we're not doing that. So that creates this whole a fun challenge of trying to figure out how to recreate that flavor and that profile without the dairy ingredients specifically.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And then on the mixed fermentation side, are you guys, because I know you guys have used like amphoras, and you're doing a lot of stuff that is borrowing from the wine world. How much is it more like the flavor of wine or the process of wine that you guys find yourself more inspired by, do you think?
Honestly, both. I would say, especially with the introduction of the amphorae, we're able to really get that mineral sort of character in almost too much early on in uses. It's a lot like a barrel where it's really strong as it starts, and over time the flavor sort of mellows out and it gets conditioned and seasoned and such. So with our earlier beers coming out of the amphora, we would have to blend them with either stainless or oak beer to make them palatable. And then as you go on, you start to get to a place where it's just really mellow and has a really nice minerality that does complement wine. So we always intend, or when we're filling the amphora, we don't always intend to make it a wine-centric sort of beer, but it goes that way very often. When we taste them, it's just like, oh, this would be so good with this particular grape, or so it goes that way a lot. But we also do the processes as well. Like we did some carbonic maceration last wine grape season in stainless, new skin contact sort of stuff. We're working on an orange wine sort of inspired beer right now with some white grapes.
Very cool. And
Yeah.
we started implementing carbonic maceration in some of our other fruits, not just grapes. So we find it to work really well, like with blueberries, for example, where blueberries in my mind are just, a tiny grape with less flavor and more tannins. So it's just like the more problematic, grape. But we have a lot more blueberries growing around us than grapes. So we started using carbonic maceration and different residencies and tank time, and also strawberries has worked really well for us. Have you guys tried that with any other fruits or just with grapes?
Just with grapes, but now I guess we'll have to try it with some other stuff. I'd never even considered it.
Yeah, we'll connect more. We'll connect more later and talk about that. I'm jealous of your grape access, though, for sure.
Definitely.
John, what is your menu of flavor inspiration? Do you gravitate towards cocktails, wine, food, anything like that really plays into your brain of design?
Well, during normal times, most of our staff here at the tap room were more cocktail people than beer-focused people per se, because we always have a large love of that. But a lot of where my inspiration comes from and things I'm looking at are sort of fruit importers. So we use a lot of sort of like esoteric fruits from around the world. So just sort of keep in touch with those folks, seeing what interesting is coming in, what's in season. Here in the Midwest, like we have a bajillion amounts of berries. It's a really great orchard fruit. But like in the summer, I want this, always like a fanciful lemony sort of Berliner Weiss sort of thing. And citrus is not in season in the summer, so we have to make that in the winter, which means I have relationships with fruit farmers in California and Florida and all that sort of stuff. So that's really just a big driver of our seasonality is what fruits are in season.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think a lot of times for me as well, it's having a conversation with the farms around us and saying, what do you grow? And we found for sure some farms that grow some really weird stuff that I never knew grew in Georgia. Probably the weirdest thing we use is hoja santa, which is this leafy green plant that typically grows in Mexico. And this one woman has a plant that she's had forever long. And it has it's a leafy plant that looks like a collard green or something of that nature, but it has the same chemical flavors and composition as like root beer. So it's this leafy green, and you use it, and it has this kind of root beer, and some people call it the root beer plant, but it's just wild. Where you typically see it in Mexican cooking, but we started using it in our mole-inspired stout for that very reason. It's pretty wild. But we never would have got there if we didn't talk to chefs or farmers. That's kind of our other lifeline, is asking chefs, hey, what's around here? Like, what do we not know about? It's pretty fun. All right, we're getting to the tail end here. I wanted to see if anybody's got any last questions out in the chat. It's been really fun talking to you guys. I guess before we go, I'd be kind of curious. Oh, we did get what current technologies do you see as a potential threat to our industry? Interesting. Maybe inward or outward focused. Rob, you got anything to hit there? It's putting you on the spot. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. As a potential threat to the industry. I think the industry is ever evolving, so I don't know if I would see any particular technology really being something that would be a threat. It might be something that just makes us have to shift gears a little bit. But I don't even know what I might view as a potential threat at this point. I'd have to think about that one.
Yeah. Well, Alex or John, anything registering with you?
I'll also cheat a little bit. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
No, you go ahead. I was just going to say no.
Definitely John.
All right. I'll say that not using pasteurization, especially tunnel pasteurization for finished product, is a giant fucking risk in this industry. And it drives me absolutely crazy. And I think it is unbelievably poor craftsmanship to have places intentionally releasing beer that they know is going to explode. I think it's a giant consumer risk. So,
yeah, it's really
question, but yeah,
it's a lack of ignoring technology. we make something that's a fermented beverage, and if you release it not fermented, that's not a very responsible thing to do. It puts, someone shouldn't have to be at risk grabbing your product that it's going to cause them harm. Absolutely. Yeah. Anything else? Anybody else got anything? I'll stand on that soapbox all day with you, John.
Yeah. Not that I see as a threat, I guess, but this kind of spans a few questions that we've covered, like technologies that I'm sort of resistant to, ways that other industries have sort of influenced this industry. Excuse me. But I think about like seltzer, obviously, and how that's become such a thing in just the beverage industry, and to such a point that many breweries are making hard seltzers now, Modern Times included. And it's kind of acted as this weird sort of backdoor to like letting extracts into the facility production. So like now they're there, and you just kind of think like, well, why not beer? And I have this just resistance to that. And also, not totally on the same page, but puree, like I try to stay away from it when I can. Like it's great to have that fruit available year round and consistently if that's what you're looking for. But I, like most of you or all of you, would always prefer to just deal locally with what's available seasonally, or not even necessarily locally, but it's great to source things directly from farmers and just get what is available and how it's available and use it in that form. And not that I think it threatens the industry, but it kind of changes people's expectations, or it can, when you can't really communicate the difference between your beer that's made with extract or with puree or with whole seasonal fruit.
Yeah, for sure. And particularly the price that goes along with that, and the time considerations. And it's really interesting. I think we're in a stark dichotomy in the world right now, in the world of our beers, in general, where you've got some people pushing to make organic beer, and there seems to be a large or decent amount of people who want to push for organic on their normal consumer basis, but it doesn't necessarily carry over to their beer consumption. Mm-hmm. And you've got other folks who are using any possible additive or whatever it may be to execute any idea, and you see that particularly in the world of like pastry stouts. So it's kind of interesting to see how those balance each other out, and how it's really going to come down to the consumer, because as much as we want to push one way or the other, if the consumer's not willing to pay for the real thing or the real product or that real experience, and they want an artificial experience, then it's going to put less real experiences on the shelf for everyone or at your local brewery. So it's a very interesting time, a very interesting thing to be in it for sure. So cool. I guess that's a good place to end it on, unless anybody want anything else to say. But I'd personally like to say thanks to everyone to being a part of this and having a great conversation with us. Thanks for all those that are watching. We're glad to be able to share our insights and our experience with all of you, and just kind of consider what's going on in our industry as far as technology and innovation goes. So, thanks to Jen for putting on this wonderful conference, and hope everyone pays attention to the rest of the conference programming. If you've only tuned into this, check out the other stuff. Cheers to all of you.
Cheers. Thank you, Blake.
Thank you all.
Absolutely.